Watched all of the episodes of Game of Thrones? Read all the books? Need your fantasy fix? Of course you do. Well, my friends, let me introduce you to the Prince of Thorns. Hello, welcome to the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter, and today we are going to take a look at Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns. Now, the publishers have kindly put a sticker on to the front cover of this, claiming that it's excellent, on a par with Jorg R.R. Martin. And who said that? It was Conn Iggulden. Iggulden. That's how you pronounce it, I think. Well, let's find out, shall we? If it really is on a par with Jorg R.R. Martin. So let's have a look at Prince of Thorns. The setting. Now, the setting is quite an unusual setting in terms of, well, when I say unusual, the character setting is slightly unusual. It's a good opening. It's a surprise opening anyway. It was for me. Hopefully this won't spoil it. I mean, this is the blurb on the back of the jacket, basically. It's set in a made-up fantasy world, like you would imagine. But for me, it opened up slightly shockingly because it follows a boy of about 13, maybe 14 years old. And he is leading a group of outlaws. And he is quite immoral. And so for me, it was like, okay, so he's going around, raising hell, basically, and doing nasty things straight away, pretty much from the first couple of pages in. So I was a bit, whoa, okay, how am I connecting to this character? And the character is actually called, let's find out what his name is. It's Jorg. I can never pronounce names in fantasy books. It's Jorg. And he is a prince, actually. He's a child of royalty, and the setup is that he turns his back on all of that. He, for various reasons, which I won't go into, he changes his mind about his royalty and decides to go off and lead this band of nasty, horrible men. And so for the first 50 or so pages, it's basically following him and his outlaws, causing mayhem and doing really dark and nasty things. And for me, to connect to that initially was a bit difficult. I found it a struggle. And I think whenever you're reading a book, you need to connect with the character pretty much straight away. I mean, obviously you give a book a chance. And I was finding I didn't really like Jorg here. I didn't like what he was doing. I didn't like his attitude. I didn't like anything about him. But it was still compelling, I must admit. I was intrigued. I started to think, well, why is somebody like this? Why has he abandoned his royal heritage? Why is he doing this? And why are all these grown men following a 13, 14-year-old boy to do all these atrocities? And that is the key of the book. It's actually to do with finding out as a reader why he's doing these things. You obviously don't want to agree with what he's doing, but you start to be led down a path by the writer of why he's doing them. The writing is first person, so you're in Jorg's head, so you get to know his thoughts. And for the first 50 pages, it was a little bit jumpy, it was a little bit flighty. I found his style of writing was a bit jumpy. I can't really describe it any other way. After about 50 pages, it settled down and the writing became really solid and just a joy to read. He has some really beautiful phrases that really, some of it made me laugh. It's quite jovial to begin with. So the attitude of the main character of Jorg is quite flippant. And he's got this horrible attitude towards other humans and other people and people are humans, aren't they? Other characters and just life in general. So he's doing all these horrible things, but he's jovial with it. You kind of really don't like him. And then you get to see flashbacks in his life. And what happens is you then become more intrigued, because you then understand why he's doing these things and why he's turning his back on his royal heritage. And to me, that's really at the heart of the book. So the theme really is about morality and immorality. And then that leads you into, well, what is moral and what is immoral? And then, killing somebody obviously is immoral, but that's because we've all agreed it is. Who's making the rules is, again, at the heart of this. And then that leads to, in a wider context, kingdoms and kingship or queenship and ruling and governments, and who makes the rules and who makes the laws. And there's a good case, and I think this is basically what happens in medieval times, is whoever's got the strongest army. Basically, whoever's got the muscle, whoever can evoke fear in the population, claims that they are king, claims that they're queen, claims that they are the rulers. So with Jorg's character, he's a boy of 13, but he's already worked out that to him, life is a game and it's to be played, and that he feels he knows how to play it. And the way that he plays it is he goes against everything that's traditional and conventional. And people can't cope with that. They don't expect somebody to act and behave like he does. So therefore, in his eyes, he has the advantage. So that's a really interesting concept. Can you actually write a book where the character is so immoral that the reader struggles to sympathise? And what happens is slowly you do start to sympathise, because you understand why he's doing these things. You don't agree with them, obviously. And the tone of the book goes from jokey and funny at the beginning to more serious, because once he does his flashbacks, you then realise the real Jorg. You actually start to see the boy and start to see his humanity, and you then start to sympathise. The bigger picture in the novel, it's a trilogy, by the way. It's the Broken Empire trilogy, and this is book 1. It's all to do with, as the Broken Empire title suggests, there's several kingdoms and the empire is broken, and so they're trying to unite the empire. So obviously his quest, he wants to be the emperor, and therefore he sees it as his duty. Now I guess he's kind of mixed up in that respect, because he's got the royal duty, but then you've also got your human side, your what you would like to do, as opposed to what royalty and in this case his father wants him to do. So you've got that inner conflict. And George R.R. Martin, the sticker on the front of the book, I can see kind of where they're coming from, because George R.R. Martin does say that, he quotes William Faulkner. He says that drama is about human heart being in conflict with itself. And this is really where Jorg is struggling, because he's struggling with who he is in the world and what he wants to achieve, and do other people accept it, and how to really kind of make your way, and your parents' expectations. So all of those things are layered into the novel. As I say, the writing initially was a little bit jumpy for me, but it did really settle down. And again, it's first person, so you get right into their heads. The story, yes, it's fairly linear to begin with, but then there are subplots that develop. So it adds a little bit more depth to the book. And as for the fantasy, like Game of Thrones, so I can see where they're comparing Game of Thrones with this book. The fantasy level is very low to begin with, but it is hinted there in the background, and then as the novel develops, certainly halfway through or maybe more towards the end, there's quite a strong fantasy element, and it's really well done. I mean, it's really surprising. There are good twists and turns, and the fantasy element it's almost like you don't notice it and then suddenly it's there, but it's done in such a way that it feels real and it feels that it should be there. So really enjoy the fantasy element of this, and overall loved this book. Thought it was well written. I thought the characterization was very well done. The outlaws, obviously they're not just typical outlaws. They're quite unique. They're rounded characters, and the journey of Jorg is quite interesting because he's set you up initially not to like him, and you don't, and then it's all about, I guess, finding out why he's doing these things, and therefore you buy into the story. You buy into, I want to find out, I want to continue on this quest. So I will certainly be reading book 2, because again, with trilogies, do you buy all 3 books? And then what if you don't like the first book? You're not really going to read book 2 or book 3. So I tend to buy book 1 of a trilogy or a series of books and then decide if I like it. Big thumbs up for this. Totally recommend it. I can see where they're going with the Game of Thrones. The Game of Thrones is slightly more complex. So if you're looking for really complex storylines and characterization, go for Game of Thrones. If you're looking for maybe a notch, maybe 2 notches down from Game of Thrones, this would certainly fulfill the criteria. There was another book that I reviewed a while ago called The Iron King, so you check out that review. And again, George R. R. Martin said that was the original Game of Thrones. So it's interesting now where I can see why publishers want to put that on the book, because if you like Game of Thrones, that's sold loads of books, so they're going to want to compare it. I would say yes, there are comparisons. I wouldn't say it's as complex, but I would say it's as enjoyable. So definitely check out The Prince of Thorns. Thank you so much for watching the Bottled Imp review of Prince of Thorns. And just to clarify, yes, it's book 1 of a trilogy, The Broken Empire. Hope you enjoyed that. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you have, thank you so much. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and all the usual places. So once again, thank you, and we'll see you next time.